debates between university faculty members. My name is Emma Tran. I'm a member of the Student Leadership Panel of the Texas IP Fellows Program, and I will be moderating today's debate. If you played a word association game with the average American, the first word associated with the University of Texas would, in all likelihood, be football. The same could be said for the University of Florida, the University of Notre Dame, and the many other schools that have built prominent and successful football programs. The relationship may go well beyond name association. A 2006 study found that most Americans connect the university's academic quality with its athletic success. College admissions offices have long noted a spike in applications a year following a national championship or major bowl game win. Complaints about student athletic programs by members of university faculties, on the other hand, are nearly as old as the programs themselves. The influence of large football programs is particularly controversial. The history of American football is linked with that of America's colleges. The first organized game occurred in 1869 between Rutgers College and the College of New Jersey. In 1889, the term All-American entered the lexicon when writer Casper Whitney named the first college football All-American team. Along with this increasing popularity, the game is becoming more violent. In 1905, after 18 players were killed in games, President Theodore Roosevelt threatened to ban the sport. 1 year later, the forerunner of today's NCAA was created to increase the safety of the game and to make sure college athletic programs were consistent with, quote, the dignity and high purpose of education. Today, college football far outstrips other college sports in popularity. Last year, attendance at NCAA football games approached 35 million. Division I programs now generate more than $2 billion in annual revenue, and 50 coaches earn a salary above $1 million. Today, we are honored to have two distinguished members of the University of Texas faculty debate whether college football is a positive influence on American universities. Arguing the affirmative case is Thomas Palaima, the Raymond F. Dickson Centennial Professor and founding director of the program of Aegean scripts and Prehistory in the Department of Classics. Professor Palaima has written extensively on Greek languages. His current interests include war and violence studies, public intellectual writing, and the cultural influence of Bob Dylan. He is also UT's representative on the National Coalition on Intercollegiate Athletics, an alliance of Division I university faculty senates that provides a faculty voice in the national debate over the future of college sports. Arguing the negative case is Lino Graglia, the Dalton Cross Professor of Law. Professor Graglia has written widely on both scholarly and popular journals on current issues of constitutional law and the role of the Supreme Court in American government. He has appeared several times on William Buckley's Firing Line, as well as The Today Show, Good Morning America, MSNBC, and many other television and radio programs. Professor Graglia has written that big-time football is, quote, a fraudulent enterprise. The format of today's debate will be as follows. Professor Palaima will be given 10 minutes to present the affirmative case. Professor Graglia will be given 5 minutes for cross-examination. Professor Graglia will then have 10 minutes to present the negative case, and Professor Palaima will have 5 minutes for cross-examination. Following the opening cases and questions, each speaker will have 5 minutes to make a closing rebuttal. That should take us to about 3:45, which will leave about 30 minutes for audience questions. We ask that you not interrupt either speaker during their remarks. Professor Palaima will now present his opening statements.
Thank you, Emma, for that kind introduction. I want to thank the IP Fellows Program for sponsoring this Chautauqua-style event, of which Socrates, a great debater himself, if he were around today, would approve. You are right that as long as there has been college football, there have been critics of college football. I have been one myself locally and nationally for about a dozen years. The problem is that most Americans do not know the meanings of words anymore. The word criticism and its cognate, the word crisis, derive from the Greek verb krino. Both are connected to the idea of making a decision or judgment. Criticisms, like faculty comments on student papers, should be aimed at improving things, making them better. Critics are not infallible. They are often outsiders to systems or practices. They often miss things that insiders see. That is why I always consult insiders on issues relating to NCAA sports, and I did so for this debate. But it's a bit like the wedding feast at Canaan, just remember that. In my dozen years of offering periodic criticisms, I've always believed in the sincerity and integrity of the principal figures involved in NCAA sports at UT Austin. They are committed to getting things right within prevailing conditions. I do not have any illusions that my criticisms will bring about significant changes. Kurt Vonnegut didn't think writing Slaughterhouse-Five would stop human beings from fighting wars. In his book, film director Harrison Starr tells him that he might as well write an anti-glacier book as an anti-war book. Vonnegut explains, what he meant, of course, was that there would always be wars, that they were as easy to stop as glaciers. I believe that too. Well, I say there will always be college football, and I'm here to say why and why that is a good thing. First, however, some more disclosure. I think that's a legal term, isn't it, Lino?
Uh-huh.
When word got out that I would be arguing
It's
the
got an interesting Greek derivation I want you into.
The word got out when word got out that I would be arguing the pro position in the debate, Professor David Fowler, head of our Men's Athletics Council, wrote, "Frankly, I am surprised, although pleased that you are taking the side of athletics. The lost odds must have given you priority seating at DKR." That sentiment, without the joke that I had been bribed, was echoed by others connected with NCAA programs here and nationally. But please remember the proposition. Is football a positive influence in American universities? Supporting this does not require taking the side of athletics. There is too much of us versus them when it comes to college football. The forerunner of the NCAA was founded in 1906 to make college athletics part of the dignity and high purpose of education. But a major article in 1928 cited no less a figure than Woodrow Wilson for the view that big-time football was a first-class octopus, strangling many of the legitimate pursuits of educational institutions. 80 years later and 2 years ago, in fall 2007, the Austin American-Statesman ran a series of front-page articles exposing excessive spending by UT's own NCAA program. Peggy Pickle, daughter of the late U.S. Congressman from Texas, whose Pickle Amendment in the 1980s caused the escalating economic wars among leading college football programs, wrote that her father never intended our sports programs to eclipse the purpose of the University of Texas. Faculty watchdog organizations like the Knight Commission and COIA, to which I belong, and congressional committees continue to try to ensure three things: academic integrity, financial integrity, and most importantly, independent certification of college football. Independent certification is necessary because the money and stakes involved for the 120 Football Bowl subdivision, or FBS programs, are very high. The NCAA now is a facilitator for revenue streams from television contracts and equipment manufacturers and the sales of trademarked sports gear and souvenirs. For example, it was reported this week that the NCAA's indecipherable system for evaluating the academic progress rate, or APR, of athlete students gives a school a passing grade if 1 out of 3 football players graduates within 6 years. If NCAA regulations produce such results, we might look for change inside our colleges and universities. Well, the media this week gave extensive coverage to the Knight Commission's report of a poll of 95 of the 120 FBS presidents. In 2007-2008, it reported 25 of the major sports programs ran profits averaging $4 million. The other 94 institutions ran deficits averaging $10 million. This gap between haves and have-nots is a big problem, and as is the impact such deficits have on the educational missions of colleges and universities. Peter Likens, President Emeritus of the University of Arizona, commented, "The current system is not sustainable." The current president of SMU said that college and university presidents have no confidence in the NCAA to solve the problems of rising coaching and athletic directors' salaries. They believe that compensation is excessive. Last year at UT Austin, an assistant football coach was given a raise of $475,000. In contrast, right now, staff salaries are frozen across the university. 70% of the faculty are getting no pay raises, not even 475 cents. And the Department of Spanish and Portuguese is cutting $600,000 from its $2 million soft money teaching budget. This will require big layoffs of AIs, TAs, and lecturers in that one department. It will negatively affect teaching of languages that are important in our state and for scholarship and teaching in Latin American studies. Other departments are likewise making major cuts. What does this say about the values of our institution? There have always been, and there now are, as I've made clear, problems with football at our major colleges and universities. Yet there will always be college football. It is a distinctive part of American higher education. Brian Davis, Associate Athletics Director for Football Academics, has over several years helped me to see why UT football players conduct themselves so well and why the current cohort group is on a track to achieve an honest graduation rate of 82%. These are the qualities UT seeks in its players: athletic ability, a 3.0 or better GPA in high school, good character and sound core values, leadership skills within school and community, intelligent self-confidence, competitiveness, and they also have to like UT. And Mac Brown makes sure that coaches who do recruiting adhere to these standards. I wanted to talk with Sam Acho, who as a full scholarship football player has achieved a 3.64 GPA in business honors and does lots of community service in home health care and with children in programs like Wonders and Worries and the Children's Courtyard. He mentors third and fourth year graders at O. Henry School. He has led a missionary trip to Nigeria. Sam and I had an appointment yesterday. He canceled. Why? He was studying for 2 exams. I said to myself, good for him and good for UT football. His studies are more important than talking with me. No wonder Sam is an academic All-American finalist. No wonder he won the Arthur Ashe Award for Outstanding Sportsmanship and Leadership and Scholastic Extracurricular and Football Achievements. He has his priorities straight. What about athlete students who do not? Do we negatively evaluate academic programs at the university based on the number of students who start but do not finish? Generally, we praise such programs for their rigor and say that they are only for those who have what it takes. As former Longhorn football player Dusty Renfro recalled, there is no excuse for athlete students not to succeed here. If you want help with academics, you get it, period, says Dusty. It's an athlete student's choice, and UT is not involved and never has been in academic fraud or dishonesty. I spoke at length with Shawn Mitchell on Sunday morning. He was a star running back whom you may remember in the mid-1990s, had one great year and then was injured. He did not focus on his studies when he was here. After pursuing football at NFL camps overseas and in non-NFL competition, Shawn has now come back to finish his degree in education, and there are a number of players like him that do not enter into these graduation rate statistics. At age 36, he is now taking his final 3-hour course. He serves as a role model and mentor to younger players. He lets them know the long odds of going and staying pro. Likewise, Derek Lokey, who graduated in 3 years as an academic All-American, is using his time now with the Kansas City Chiefs expressly to save money for law school. He already knows that the NFL stands for not for long. Let me end my opening remarks with the insights of a colleague in the Macomb School of Business whose judgment, values, and candor I have long respected, James Dietrich. UT football players, in Professor Dietrich's view, have the opportunity to earn a college degree that they might not otherwise have been able to pursue, especially the economically and socially disadvantaged. They have a chance to work hard toward achieving their potential in an area where they are gifted and talented. And this area is highly valued by society. They learn to be leaders, decision makers, and followers, to work within a team framework regardless of how things are going. This learning certainly carries over to life as they mature and move on. Football creates strong, positive memories, as I know from interviewing former UT football player Dustin Armstrong, who was athletics director at St. Francis School in Austin. And it creates lifelong friends of different races, religions, cultures, and regions. Football brings diverse people together who must work together. They take satisfaction and pride in representing the state and university in a national setting. Not many students have that honor or experience, and let me say that with rare exception, they do this with real class and grace. They learn time management skills, which are invaluable in life. They travel and learn about American history and tradition. I will speak more in my closing statement about what football does for us at this university. Thank you.
Professor Graglia, you have 5 minutes for cross-examination.
When they asked me would I do this, and I said yes, I asked who the other side would be, and they told me Professor Palaima, and I said, wouldn't it be more appropriate to get an opponent? And his talk raises that problem for me, since I agree with almost everything he said. He told us 1/3 of football players graduate, that the vast majority of schools, 95, are suffering economic losses. Only very few have a gain. And then he spent much of his time on excessive compensation and comparing the $900,000 compensation for the assistant coach to the freezing of salaries for everybody else. Well, there's not much I can cross-examine on that. He tells us that football will always be with us, and I guess like most evils, that's probably the case. But as he knows, there's a recent article in the New Yorker, reported in the papers, about the effects of playing football on the brain. And it turns out they're not beneficial. Now, the football industry, the NFL, is studying this at great length. And as a matter of fact, I think they hired the economists that studied the tobacco problem for the tobacco companies to study this. They figured that would work out better for their results. And what they're concluding is that even high school, it turns out when 250-pound men run into one another at high speed several times in an hour or so, it doesn't help the brain later on. And I think the situation is that no sensible parent today would agree to have a son play football. And if we get more sensible parents, maybe that will finally be the end of football. He told us, that it provides opportunity for minorities that might not have the opportunity, which I think statistics would have a difficult time backing. One of the best authorities on sports and sports on blacks in particular is Harry Edwards, a very well-known prof, I think at Berkeley. And he writes here that the undeniable fact is that through its blind belief in sport as an extraordinary route to social and economic salvation, black society has unwittingly become an accessory to and a major perpetrator of the rape, or less figuratively put, the disparate exploitation of the black student athlete. We have, in effect, set up our own children for academic victimization and athletic exploitation by our encouragement, if not our insistence upon the primacy of sports achievement. My first question to Professor Palaima is, what do you think of that?
Well, I was wondering if there was going to be a time to answer these many questions you've raised. Yes, you quite rightly see my debating tactic. I am a critic of football, and I see some of the same problems that you do. The 1/3 graduation rate statistic, however, is something that the NCAA has set up. As I've cited, programs that are running their ship correctly, that really care about the students as student athletes, UT Austin among them. This year, the cohort group now moving through will graduate at an 82% rate, which is well beyond the normal population of students here. Yes, 95 of the Division 1A Bowl Championship Series teams are in the red. That is a critical problem. But as I was talking to a Statesman reporter ahead of time, the problem is not necessarily within the universities or athletics programs. If the government would not, the federal government had not made an unfunded Title IX mandate that required women's sports to be supported, from where? And if the state of Texas, as President Powers said in his State of the University address, had not underfunded the university with 2% average allocations over the last 20 years, we would have perhaps sources of revenues that wouldn't require schools to desperately chase the academic, the athletic dollar. As far as the effects, I'm well aware of the effects of that have been studied. The New Yorker article was among them. We even talked about that in your office, I believe. And there was a recent article just sent me this morning in the New York Times. This is going to be looked at, and one was going to have to see what needs to be done. But there are other sports that are brutal and are still part of our society, boxing among them. I'm a big Bob Dylan fan. One of his early songs was "Who Killed Davy Moore?" A boxer. Why and what's the reason for? And it's not me, said the boxing writer, not me, said the promoter, not me, said the coach. Well, the people who kill Davy Moore are the people who want to see this violent sport perpetuated. So my response, Lino, to you, and even to Harry Edwards, yes, indeed, people are coming from disadvantaged environments, and football has become one of the brass rings that one reaches for. Shawn Mitchell even admitted this. Dustin Armstrong admits this as well. You're a high-quality athlete. You see this as something that you can do. This has been a revelation to me. I always thought the same as you did. Well, Jim, you're here, another classicist. How many of the people who started graduate school in classics with you got their PhDs, and then how many went on to successful careers, and how many got very, very prominent positions in colleges and universities? So it strikes me as being a kind of, I mean, I know it's from Harry Edwards, and I know who he is, but it's almost a kind of reverse racism to say that these people can't make decisions for themselves, and when they get to the university, cannot succeed. And by the way, when I spoke of disadvantaged students, I did not use racially disadvantaged students. I did not play the race card.
Professor Graglia, if you have no further questions, you can proceed with your prepared remarks.
I can what?
Proceed with your prepared remarks.
Thank you.
No problem.
I don't think there's really any hope of trying to win a debate against someone who relies on as his major source and authority, Bob Dylan. He's got me. He's got me. Dylan said so. What can I say? I have to admit that.
Pulitzer Prize.
I think Pulitzer Prize monument is Bob Dylan.
Kennedy Center
Hey,
Award.
all right, I agree. I quit. He's got me. You won. Bob Dylan.
And specially commissioned by
Wait
the
a minute.
Pope.
What I want to know is, what did Michael Jackson say about this? Damn. Let me begin by noting.
Oh, wait, I'm picking Michael up on my headset.
What is he doing? Let me begin by noting, though it should not be necessary, that I am not against sports, and certainly not against exercise. I used to play tennis regularly and snow ski until my knees gave out, and I still take 30 to 40-mile bike rides. I think that nothing is more important to health, mental as well as physical, than exercise, and that colleges, therefore, should do more to encourage intramural sport and other physical activity. The only activity big-time college football encourages, however, is sitting in front of the TV. What I am against is corruption and fraud, and I must be against it more than most people, or we would not have big-time college football, because everyone knows, I assume, that it is based on a deception, that a purely commercial enterprise masquerading as an educational one. The coaches are not teachers. We don't pay teachers millions of dollars a year, but the CEOs of a large commercial enterprise. The players are not ordinary students. Many are not qualified to be. but essentially unpaid workers in the business of providing quasi-professional sports entertainment. Even some of the games are not contests. Instead, a powerhouse like UT actually pays weak teams to take a beating, to boost UT's won-loss record. No one doubts any of this, even my supposed opponent, Professor Palaima, who had been deeply involved, as you've heard just now, with UT football for a long time and certainly knows a lot more about it than I do, has labeled this as, quote, a clearly corrupt system, which led me to wonder here, what we can take his word for it, led me to wonder, what was this debate going to be? Is he going to come out in favor of corruption? Because as I understand it, that's the debate, and I'm on one side. The point of a commercial enterprise, of course, is to make money, but big-time college football, as we just heard, is paradoxically a big money loser on an overwhelming majority of the schools. Money that could otherwise be spent on education. Why then do they do it? This question does not apply to UT, which apparently makes so much money on football, it can afford a $3 million coach. The UT football program has been exceptionally successful commercially, no problems there, but at the corresponding cost of being exceptionally unsuccessful academically, despite, to my great surprise, what I've just been told. Most college football programs recruit and admit football players with a combined math and reading SAT score about 200 points lower than the average SAT score of regularly admitted students. At UT, however, the gap is over 300 points. And this is reflected in the average GPAs for football players. Taking the figures from Professor Palaima, he tells me that, or at least in the past, that for the first 3 years, the average figures for football players are 1.8 GPAs, 1.9, and 2, as compared to an average for students in, overall of 3.05. So I'm certainly delighted to hear how greatly this has recently improved, right? This must be like the practice of medicine, you know, which used to kill more people than it cured, but today is wonderful. UT, he also told us the UT has a graduation rate of 40%. Gee, it got to be 82% now. Terrific. 27% for blacks. It is extremely doubtful that a college is admitting a student with a 300-point SAT academic disadvantage is doing him a favor. It's a virtual guarantee of poor performance or failure. But doing football players a favor is not, of course, the point of big-time college football. There is no reason to doubt these figures, as I say. They come from Professor Palaima. But why do money-losing schools, the vast majority, have football programs? For one thing, they seem to be have trapped themselves in a situation, sometimes called an arms race, in which they are tempted to the forlorn hope that if they only spend still more money, for example, buy a still more expensive coach, they will eventually become commercially successful. That this debate could not be more timely can be seen from an article in just yesterday's New York Times that I think Professor Palaima just referred to. The call to curb athletic spending, quote, from stratospheric coaches' salaries to a growing divide between the haves and the have-nots of college sports, university presidents say they are very worried about the commercialization of intercollegiate athletics. Gee, those poor guys ought to talk to Tom. Yet they are powerless to do much about it. Many consider that to be the most pressing issue facing college sports today. How to diffuse the arms race in spending by the nation's top college sports programs and ensure that institutions with a smaller budget can continue to compete. And the answer is there is no way. No matter how much other schools spend, UT will spend more. And Tom will tell us why that's wonderful for all of us when he's in that mood, not when he's in the mood of writing this stuff. The only rational thing for smaller or less affluent schools to do is to drop out of the race and try to improve their reputation instead by spending the money on academics. The two most frequently offered additional justifications for schools incurring these financial losses are that a successful football program may result in a significant increase in student applications and in alumni donations. These claims, however, are not well supported by experience. A 2004 article by a professor of management and economics at Cornell, after reviewing many studies, said that he dismisses these claims as myths. An increase in applications is desired because it enables a school to be more selective, which increases its average SAT score and its rejection rate, both of which are factors considered in determining a school's ranking in U.S. News. And the number one objective and priority of American institutions of higher education is a higher U.S. News ranking. That's the point of education, to rise in that ranking. Unfortunately, it appears that putting more money into the football program does not necessarily raise a school's average SAT and ranking, and may sometimes have the opposite effect. It turns out that the type of student who chooses a school because of football success does not necessarily contribute a high SAT. As to alumni giving, some studies show that bowl game appearances, as she mentioned, have a positive effect, but others show no effect or possibly a negative effect. In any event, much of the increase in alumni giving as a result of football success tends to be earmarked for only football, or even just athletics. To at least some extent, that is money that might have otherwise gone to improve academics, rather than to build a larger stadium. Football program and athletic program fundraisers frequently cross paths, soliciting the same alumni and competing for donations. Big-time college football didn't become fraudulent and corrupt by accident. It's designed to be fraudulent. It's inevitable. Coaches can earn their million-dollar salaries only by winning. And winning requires obtaining the services of exceptionally talented football players. That's about all it requires. I could be the coach if I could get 12 Vince Youngs to play for me. But the coaches are not allowed to obtain these services, like all others in our economic system, by bidding for them openly and honestly in a free market. The schools would then have to pay the players what their services are worth, which, as the coaches' salaries indicate, would be quite a lot. So the coaches must therefore obtain the services by other means. They must be willing, for example, to mislead potential recruits and the public into believing that an SAT deficiency score of more than 300 points does not preclude academic success, and one being a legitimate UT student. Almost every week, it seems, we read about another instance of the NCAA imposing penalties on a school because of its football coach's wrongdoing, and about football players being in trouble with the law. What a surprise! Who would have thought that would happen from such a designed system? The purpose of the criminal law is, of course, to deter wrongdoing. Nothing could be more inconsistent with this crucial social objective than a system that first creates positive incentives to wrongdoing and then claims to seek to control it by threats of punishment. A legal system cannot prevent all wrongdoing, no matter how hard it tries, but minimum rationality requires that it prohibits schemes that inevitably lead to wrongdoing, namely big-time college football. I have more here, but I'm told I'd better quit. I will use that later.
Professor Graglia, Professor Palaima, you have 5 minutes for cross-examination.
I like to stand up here. Lino started off with his own account of his sports activities, and I'll tell you mine. I grew up playing baseball 16, 18 hours a day. I played shortstop, I then played center field. And I only stopped playing baseball when a curveball became too hard to hit for me, and fastballs became too fast for my talent. But what that taught me in life, and I think one of the things I will agree with you on, is that there are things that are out of whack with big-time sports, big-time football among them. One of the worst aspects of this arms race is the scheduling. I ran statistic once that over the last 7 years, UT plays maybe one or two teams a year that are true competitors, and in the rest of the games, their average victory margin was 34 points. I mean, this is no longer competition, and the athletes are not learning much from it. But a lot of your other criticisms, Lino, fall under the heading of something I read as a young man and still retain to this day. Tom Boswell's, who was sports writer for the Washington Post, How Life Resembles the World Series. Sports is a mirror of life, and I'm absolutely certain of that. So when we look at the Darrell K. Royal Stadium and see luxury skyboxes, when we look at the salaries of Mac Brown and see $3 million, or Will Muschamp and see $900,000, we're seeing a reflection of the same system that operates in society. We've seen it on Wall Street, we see it in gated communities, we see it in the great income disparity that is arising more and more within our society. So the point then isn't whether football is somehow to blame. It becomes a kind of lightning rod and reflection of our society as a whole, and I believe that one can make corrections. Now, let's get to your particular points. The statistics you cited on GPAs, where you misread my chart in my Koya report. 1.8, 1.9, and 2.0 were the GPAs that were needed to maintain eligibility by any NCAA athlete in his second, third, and fourth year, according to APR stats. In fact, the football players at UT and the players in general have average GPAs that are just below 3 or in some cases above 3, depending on the sport. And so, and what has happened here with this, also with revenue sharing. You made the point that football generates all these revenues and keeps it to itself. That's not true in general, because as we know, were it not for big-time football revenues, we wouldn't have the women's sports programs that we do around here. So there's cost sharing there. But because of faculty criticisms in the last 4 or 5 years, they are now giving money over to the academic side of the issue. And in my summation, I'll give you the report from Bill Powers and from Chris Plonsky as to the amounts that are given. As far as football players in the news, you may have remembered a couple summers ago that there were many UT football players who were arrested for driving violations late in the night. And even I chimed in on that one. This is horrendous. But the former head of the UT Libraries, who's now retired, chimed in and said, you know, for many years I was a counselor to athletes. These people are in a fishbowl. And if you think of the number of athletes that there are out there in the overall population of the United States, it would be surprising. It's actually more is the surprise that we don't have 20 incidents a day. We have maybe one that crops up every so often. And no student athlete, to my knowledge, has killed his girlfriend and chopped her up in a bathtub, as happened here with a normal student a few years ago on the West Campus. So what I think that, is that the football becomes a kind of lightning rod. People live in a fishbowl, and that any minor infraction. In fact, I might as well just speak frankly, since you brought up Harry Edwards and Frank talk about race. More than one person wrote to me when I chimed in on these arrests and said, Tom, just really think of it from the perspective of the student athletes. Many of them were arrested not for driving while intoxicated, but for driving while black. And that's an unfortunate, and we all know that this still goes on. I mean, it's not just athletes of color, but prominent people of color. We just had this case at Harvard University, right, with Professor Gates there, which became a national issue. So I think there were some things that needed clarification, and I hope I've raised them.
Professor Palaima, you can still continue with your closing remarks. Professor,
me?
Yeah, closing remarks.
Oh, okay. Well, I thought, well, as I said, this is not so much rebuttal, but summation. And I won't repeat myself, but I'll rely on those who deal with UT NCAA sports on an almost daily basis and have insights that I don't have. Let's start at the top. If you wonder, as long as I did, why Bill Powers believes in the positive values of Longhorns football, here is his candid response to my asking straight out. When I see alumni, there are a lot of very successful people on many metrics who are athletes at UT. I would emphasize that I'm serious school spirit. For most of the public, athletics is the place where they first connect, sometimes when they are very young, to our university. And this is what bonds them while they are here and keeps them bonded in life. That in turn leads to financial and other support for higher education. Some donors and supporters stay in athletics, but a lot start there and then give to other departments. I think the Jamales did that, Red McCombs. People think that a high percentage of our donations goes to athletics, but it's a bit less than 10%. A lot start there and then branch out. American education, higher education, is the envy of the world. From state colleges to the Ivy Leagues, we have the most extensive network of higher education anywhere. Many factors contributed to that, including a robust economy for a century and the GI Bill. The public is connected to higher education, but athletics, and especially football, has been a major factor in that for about a century. And as I mentioned, in the last year, athletics has begun, in response to criticism, directing money to academics. President Powers confirms that the university receives 10%, or a minimum of $1 million a year, from licensing revenue that sports generates. Athletics has donated $7 million in the last 4 years. Much of that money has gone to the new UGS initiative and to other programs. The university co-op can fund awards to graduate and undergraduate students and to faculty from revenues that come from sports merchandise. David Fowler, head of the Men's Athletics Council, stresses the view of former President Norman Hackerman when he went to Rice University, where they had no big football program. He then realized how a good program in intercollegiate athletics promoted a feeling of community and pride, brought in a large number of former students and friends on a regular basis. These are great positives. David reinforces what James Dietrich stressed, that athletics is a vehicle for bringing disadvantaged students to campus, and UT Athletics helps them succeed academically. Statesman sports writer Suzanne Halliburton rattled off a whole list of names of people who came to campus with 300 points deficiencies on their SATs and completed successful degrees with the help of the tutors and with serious advice as to what classes to take. Women's athletics director Chris Plonsky has this to say: "One can't compete unless one is given a chance to get in the game. Athletics at many institutions provides access to higher education for minority students. Thousands of women, still today a minority in terms of comparative opportunities, have collegiate degrees thanks to Title IX. Minority men have no Title IX, but they've had access to scholarships to participate in football and other sports and to pursue an undergraduate degree. Football and other sports require commitment, suppression of ego, sacrifice of individual goals for the greater good, and the ability to learn to be coached." Statesman sports writer Kirk Bowles thinks, as I do, that football and basketball were professionalized about 20 years ago. Something has to be done about that. But he sees, as I do, pros and cons. Among the pros are what President Powers, Professor Fowler, and by report, former President Hackerman stressed. Big-time college sports is a rallying point for alumni, bringing in all sorts of alumni back to campus, and they continue to be filled with pride for the school and are advocates for the school. Athletes in particular learn how to deal with the media, the fishbowl effect, as I've mentioned, present themselves to the public, and bring balance and organization to their own lives. And many of these athletes will turn to coaching and have positive influence on youth at all levels. I have seen this myself in Dustin Armstrong at my son's elementary and middle school alma mater, St. Francis School, and I know Shawn Mitchell has lots to offer as well. Let me close, however, with the words of a great figure in Texas history and our university, whose statue now provides a place for contemplation under live oak trees north of the UT Union. I mean Barbara Jordan. She was herself a formidable debater at Texas Southern University and throughout her life. She made these remarks at a symposium on issues of integrity in athletics on April 7, 1994. Why does sport matter so much, she asked. It matters because sport is vital, it is viable, it is basic, and it is essential. Sport is not a frivolous distraction as one may first without thinking believe. Sport is an equal opportunity teacher. It is a nonpartisan event. It is universal in its application. I see sport as an antidote to some of the balkanization that we see occurring in our society. Everybody wanting their own private little piece of turf. An absolute abandonment of any sense of common purpose or common good. It is almost a cliche to say there is no I in the word team. If you are so focused on yourself, you cannot have any awareness of the common good. And she concludes, I believe that sport can teach lessons in ethics and values for our society. It is attractive to the young, and how many times have we heard someone despair over the plight of our young people? If you give them something to engage their energies, you would see that it might be something which lures them into the community of mankind and womankind. I would conclude that sport has been with us not only since Homer's Iliad, but in my own knowledge of Greek prehistory, since the shaft graves that started Greek culture in the 17th and 16th centuries BC. It's a vital part of almost any culture. My remarks here have nothing to do with Lino, but they have everything to do with a general sense. I believe, and I'm still going to maintain myself as a critic of what's going on, because there's a lot that's amiss over commercialization, being prime on the list. But these are not necessarily faults of the sport itself, but of the people who control the sport. And I think Barbara Jordan is absolutely right that there's a great opportunity here in big-time football for communal engagement. But you do not have communal engagement when you have the social stratification of luxury skyboxes where people don't even have to sit with one another in common decency, but go up via elevators to a luxury area where they don't even have to come into contact with the hoi polloi. That, again, as I said before, is a reflection of our society, and I think that is something that needs to be corrected as well. But it derives, again, from the economics of the sport. Luxury skyboxes bring in, what, $8, $9, $10 million a year. That's a fact.
Professor Graglia, you have 5 minutes for your closing remarks.
Let me first read the very brief remainder of the talk that I have prepared. As to alumni giving, you know, the first idea is it raises the SIT, more applications, raises the SAT. That's, as I say, the studies seem to indicate that's not the case. Those are the two main justifications given, by the way. The other one is, I said it's alumni giving. Much of that money just goes to sports, and it's money that could go to academics. Big-time football, as I didn't become, well, I think I've done that too, more complete than I thought. I want to get finally to my real, or at least my most serious objection to big-time college football. It is not that it corrupts coaches competing for a few top-level recruits and college officials like President Powers. If he didn't tell you about the glories of football, he sure wouldn't be in Texas, right? Who must defend football to keep their jobs. My principal objection, much more serious, is that it corrupts the students. Colleges teach by example as much as by what they say. And the message of big-time football to bright young students eager to learn is that lying and cheating are sometimes acceptable. It teaches that pretense and deceit are excusable if acknowledged with a smirk, a wink, and a nudge. Is it really surprising that many of our political leaders are practiced in and tolerant of falsehood when they were trained in institutions where the product of falsehood was displayed and cheered every Saturday morning in the fall or afternoon or whenever? There is also, of course, a question of an institution's culture and the effect that having a large number of quasi-professional athletes on a college campus has on the school's intellectual atmosphere. If one asked whether UT is a serious academic institution or primarily a football factory, as the introducer said, the first thing you'd think of is football. Who ever heard of an academic achievement? If you were asked that question, it would surely be relevant to point out that not only is the football coach, but even the assistant football coach, paid at a rate at least 10 times that of a full professor. As I said, I'm not against college football, but only its fraudulence. If the mission of the UT is to provide sports entertainment as well as education, it should do it honestly. Pay the players what they're worth and relieve them of the burden of having to pretend that they're students. We just heard an extended paean of praise to the beauties of sport and Barbara Jordan, a more reputable source, I admit, than Bob Dylan. And I agree with her entirely. Sport is great. As I started out by saying, of course, he topped me with this fastball, curveball stuff. I just ride a bike. Sport is, but what does that have to do with this? We're talking about commercialized college football. I put it to you. Can you deny it's a system where the coaches are paid huge amounts of money? I mean, $3 million a year is a nice salary in this country. Not many people are that important in their social contribution, right? They're paid that kind of money. Why? To win. But they cannot buy what they need. They have to get it some other way. Now, is that not an inevitable? It's set up to be corrupt. Is it surprising then that the NCAA finds corruption? And Palaima, very innocently and purely, not for him to play the race card, he tells us, and then he plays it as grossly and totally as anyone, right? Why are all these football players found to be in trouble with the law? Hey, it's racism. Everybody knows that. We live in the most liberal city, certainly in Texas, hardly anywhere, where every leaning over backward is taken the other way, and he tells it's all racism. And look, just simply, is not the system designed to be corrupt? You're supposed to win, but you can't pay. What are you going to do? And he tells us how wonderful it's all working. Are all the other college presidents wrong? I mean, today's New York Times tells us the biggest problem these college presidents see is the commercialization of football and the arms race and the ever necessary push to spend more money. That's inescapable. And all those fantasy tales he's telling you have very little to do with the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Graglia and Professor Palaima. I would like to open the floor to questions. If you have any from the audience, please proceed to the microphone and ask. Anybody? Or you guys can continue asking each other
There's
questions.
someone. Yeah.
The microphone, please.
And as you think of questions, and I hope you do, because there certainly was enough fodder for questions. Why don't you just come up behind this gentleman and get ready to ask the next one? That would be good.
I'm a visiting professor, so I'm not an expert on football. But I was wondering, because I heard a lot about sports in general, and I can't agree more with you about the importance of sports in general. But it strikes me that how many students are part of the Longhorns team? 20, 50, 100? I don't know. I'm asking.
How many students are part of the NCAA program?
Are part of the team?
In about 105. In
105,
football.
okay. What's the percentage of 105 students of the total students of this university? Because I think that's an important issue.
Yeah,
No?
there are
Let's leave
36,000 undergraduates. I did the calculations.
So more than what percentage are we talking about?
Who has a calculator? Or I have to go back to my Jesuitical training.
Because I think, to be honest, and of course, this question, my final objective is, I mean, is it this talk about sport is something, but I can't agree more with Professor Graglia in the sense that, I mean, we have to be, this is a debate, a very specific debate about 150 students of UT against to 300,000, I don't know how many more.
Well, in a school this large, over 35,000 undergrad, as he says, the number of athletes, and not only football players, but athletes in general, is necessarily a very small percentage.
Okay.
In some other colleges, in small liberal arts colleges, the number of athletes becomes quite significant, as much as 20% sometimes when you take of all the various sports. And it has, by common agreement, except for Professor Palaima, a very deleterious effect. You know, he told us the American education is the envy of the world. That's true, despite football. Despite what all these small colleges are doing, struggling to keep up with AT&T, and they'll never do it, for money they could be using for academics. Do we need a new chemistry lab? Do we need a new studio in the English department? We need a new football stadium. That's all you get. Did I ever say that the football here, they do not contribute to other things? I didn't think I said that. They do, recently, as he said, as a result of criticism. Yes, they're enormously commercially successful. This guy is a big CEO of a very successful enterprise, our coach. He makes tons of money. Why do you think he's paying $3 million? There's enough to throw off. He's throwing off a few tens of thousands to something else. Well, good for you, Mac.
Okay, the only thing I want to say, just to finish, is that in a debate about an academic institution like UT, I do think that this percentage is not a minor data, no? I mean, the fact that we're talking about 105 students out of many
that's
students,
in football.
it's not a minor thing.
If you wanted to raise the question about basketball, what, are there 14 members of the basketball team?
Yeah, but the debate has dealt mainly with the football team, right?
Well,
So
but
that's why I mentioned the football team.
Well, I really don't know exactly what you're getting at with the numbers, and I'm sorry that I don't. But one definition of an intelligent mind is being able to hold contrary ideas in your mind at the same time. And I think that's what, I think Professor Graglia does that certainly in his legal work and other intellectual work, and I do as well. I mean, you can't explore an issue without seeing it from all perspectives. And the UT total number of NCAA athletes here has fluctuated anywhere between like 493 and 511 over the last few years. But those are the athletes that are, and this is Chris Plonsky's argument and one that I'm in sympathy for. There is another category of people who are admitted to campus with substandard SAT scores. That is, people who are in the performing arts. They get special presidential scholarships if they play musical instruments and don't have the academic requirements that are needed. And this is a verifiable fact. I tracked it down one time. Now, are they in the same numbers as the people who play football? Probably not. But then again, we're talking about apples and oranges. I did calculate one time the amount expended per athlete via the amount expended per student. And the Department of Education has a recent report that just came out where you can, in fact, I have it in my notes here. But the expenditure on the average student at UT is $34,000 if you take the educational part of the budget and divide it by the 36,000 undergrads. The amount for the athletes is about $240,000 per athlete. If you take, again, the gross athletic revenues and divide them up by these 500. So you can see the distortion.
Thank you.
You know, he tells us that even in arts and performing music, some concession is made to admission. But it doesn't compare to this. Again, the sort of misleading thing that's said. Is the average concession there over 300 SAT points? It certainly is not. You don't do anyone a favor, as I said, by admitting them to a school with 300 with a 300-point deficiency, if you expect that person to be at the school and to be a student, which they're not. Now, he talked about, I would not want to contest with Palaima on the skill of holding contrary notions in your mind at the same time. He's much better at that than I am. And then
I
he
take
tells
that,
us,
I take
and
that,
we,
by the way, as a compliment.
well, I give it as a compliment. I admire it. I've never seen a greater chameleon in a debate.
Oh, I've not been comic at all, you know.
Not comical, chameleon.
Only in little...
Chameleon,
only
the little
chameleon.
chameleon, the
Oh,
multicolored little lizard. You know, but in this two ideas, he criticizes football. How about, yeah, he's got to criticize. You know what it is? There's a special elevator for the boxers. How about that? Of all the problems with football, what we got to do is get rid of that special elevator, because that shows American society, some people so rich they have a box. You know, about the least significant, the least on point criticism of this entirely corrupt, fraudulent system is his populism that, gee, the rich people get to ride the elevator and I'd have to use the stairs. Tough.
Well, the reason that is pertinent, I hope you understood me, is that the main driving force for the expansion of Darrell K. Royal Stadium in actually three phases now, since 1997, when we poured $250 million into the renovation of that stadium, the main driving force was the installation of skyboxes, because that's where the money revenues come in. And yes, I'm a populist. I'm an unabashed populist. And a few years back, let me give you an anecdote. I had in my ancient history class a guy who was about 85 years old. And I had written one of my critical articles in the Statesman about some sports success of one sort or another. And he said he wanted to have lunch with me and tell me how it was. Now, back in the 40s and 50s, he had been a high school coach. He still used words for African Americans that one would consider really reprehensible. But one of the things that he talked about was exactly what I find problematical about the revenue-driven developments within football. Namely, he said in the old days, everybody came together to that stadium. I used to go there with my father-in-law, whose belt buckle I'm wearing. And the colonel had seats in DKR. But everybody was sitting out in the open air. Of course, the more privileged people had box seats, but they were still out in the stands with us. And that's a far different thing than this. It's the equivalent of the gated community. And I am enough of a socialist Democrat to believe that this kind of segregation by wealth in our society is terribly harmful. It means that you have an entirely wealthy class that doesn't even have to concern themselves with those people playing down there. You sit inside a skybox, you can't even hear the noise of the helmets meeting with one another. So you don't even know that there's a potential for them to have brain injuries. You don't hear a player groaning when they get a crucial injury. You're divorced from it all, and they're like playthings down beneath you. So yes, I mean, this is to me, a very, very serious issue again, and it's a way that big-time sports reflects our culture. And it's very, very harmful in a democracy to have, any democracy, to have this tremendous income disparity. And I think it also detracts from the game. I've been at games where if you're in a skybox, I would say maybe 10% of the time are the people even looking down at the field. And even the club section. I mean, I went into the club section. I went with Michael Granoff to a game. We went into club section. And you know, we were scurrying to get back for the second half. No one in there was. Everybody was sitting around, drinking, talking to one another. You know, that's not attending a football game.
Isn't the corruption of football a big enough topic? Do we have to talk about income redistribution?
Yes.
And the merits of socialism? I mean, it's a great topic. Let's get here the next time.
Connect, Lino.
They connect like on the nth degree because you're avoiding the issue. Go ahead. We want to hear from someone finally, for goodness sakes.
I'm a very proud graduate of this extraordinary university. I have never been to a football game. I would consider going if someone paid me $1 million. I am very happy to see a diverse representation of the student body here today. And I believe that racism and stratification are two of the most serious matters in our society that we need to make a lot of progress on. So it's been my observation that there are not very many Asian or Hispanic star football players. perhaps because they don't have as many big people who aspire to that. But I have seen a phenomenon in Austin where Hispanic pride, rather than preserving culture beyond lip service for the historic Texas-Mexican musical and other culture, is now manifested most strongly to the point where churches cannot have their annual affairs on days where there's a football game, even on TV, to manifesting identification with the university through spending money that they would be better off spending on a book for a kid on athletic gear, to identify with this university. And I don't think it's possible to really delve into that on a statistical level, but I think that those people that identify so strongly with this great university, the university is doing a lot of outreach and trying to promote aspirations to higher education in disadvantaged populations. But I bet so few of those people who identify with the UT sports program and spend all that money and put all their energy on drinking and going to bars and watching games and caring about the team, that they actually would encourage their children or grandchildren not to drop out of school and instead inspire to be a university student. And I'm wondering what your response?
If it's directed, if you want a response from me, I don't know how to respond for that. I mean, it's an area where, it's general observations here. I have no knowledge of the social dynamics that go on in that kind of environment. I dare say that, however, that if you went to in Cleveland, Ohio, where I'm from, people are identifying with the Cleveland Cavaliers or the Cleveland Browns or the Cleveland Indians even, and doing the same thing around sports that you say goes on here with regard to the University of Texas at Austin. And again, that's a product of the commercialization, but I think if UT weren't here with that form of identification, they would probably be supporting the Dallas Cowboys or something of this sort in a much more dramatic fashion. Again, one of the reasons I went to all of these principal people, Chris Plonsky, Brian, are you here? Brian Davis, who's been a tremendous source of information for me, and I'm not a bullshit artist. I mean, there's been no con job from Brian. He's always told me things straight away, the pros and the cons, the warts and the treasures. He's gotten me in contact with people who are struggling and are trying to right their ship, like Shawn Mitchell. He's gotten me in touch with star players, star academic players. So, but the reason I got in contact with him was not because I wanted to be a chameleon, but because when I was approached about having this debate, I said, well, I can take the con side. Well, but we want Professor Graglia to do that. We'd like you to do the pro side. I said, but look, I have all these criticisms. Well, go ahead. And I think the way they described me was correct. A critic of some of the practices, but somebody who believes that sports properly integrated with education has a value. And I think that a lot of that is done here, and I think that things are moving in a positive direction. But just as anything in society, nothing is going to change until enough people get behind changing. So we have what the general society wants. It's just like Kurt Vonnegut says. His book, Slaughterhouse-Five, no matter how great, is not going to stop war. Particular criticisms by faculty watchdog groups, by Tom Palaima, criticisms by Lino Graglia, are not going to stop what we consider the excesses. What does stop it are people inside like Brian Davis, who says, you know, that these graduation rates that Lino cited are terrible. We shouldn't be graduating 34%. We should be doing better. So Randa Ryan, Brian Davis, institute ways of making sure these students take legitimate courses, stay on, bring people like Shawn Mitchell back to be role models, to say, hey, look, I saw what I missed. Don't you be like me, and I'm getting an education now. So that's where the things will turn around. So these things may exist But, you know, the thing is to think of ways in which we can find solutions to them. You know.
Okay, I just want to start by saying that I came a long way from home to come to this university, and originally I knew nothing about the university, but the reason I did research on it and found out about the business school, which I'm involved in now, is because of the sports program. And just as a regular teenager who watches sports, not just football, but basketball, baseball, volleyball, whatever, learning about like the sporting events and the programs and the school spirit that it brings together, and like knowing that having such a large student body can be brought together by all these sporting events and school spirit, I think that's a positive effect of the university, having a sporting program that can represent your school in a way that can bring students from out of state like myself. And I just wanted to also point out that there aren't just renovations to the stadium going on. Like you said, the Sciences building, there's tons of new buildings being built. There's construction everywhere. Every year there's new buildings being built for all kinds of academic purposes, not just sports. And I just wanted to see what you guys thought about universities such as St. John's that used to have a football program and now do not have any because they felt that it was a negative effect on their school. So I just want to get your take on that.
Yes, as I say, I'm all for sports. I think we ought to encourage intramural sports and intramural facilities and much more money put into it than we do now. If Texas is supposed to have provide sports entertainment, and that brings people together in community and so on, all I'm objecting to, as I say, is the dishonesty. Do it honestly. That is, don't pretend that people are students. If you've got to have people with 300-point SAT deficiencies, then pretend you've got students. That's not a good example. That's just bad for the world. It's certainly bad for students. Pay these players. They're very valuable people. Pay them what they're worth. Don't make them to pretend they're students. If they're here and they want to go to school and take a course, fine. But instead of this whole pretense, hey, we're admitted, we're UT students. And, you know, it's not possible. Do these sports bring about the sense of community? I guess so. I'm all for intramural sports. I don't know why we can't do that. You know, or even, you know, even intercollegiate. But maybe it should be intercollegiate only in Texas. So play A&M. You know, not this giant commercial enterprise. He says, you know, the Texas football program supports other things. Of course it does. It makes tons of money. But it's got nothing to do with education, and certainly even more than here. Here I say the problem is not lack of commercial success and lack of money, but that's the major problem at 95% of the schools that are struggling to have football teams. I don't know what it does for student community, but it sure can't do enough.
Well, on the score, UT has the finest intramural facilities up there north of 51st Street. I think that is the largest intramural facility, outdoor intramural facility in the United States, and it's beautiful. I played intramural softball there. I am now playing for the first time ever intramural soccer. I've been a defensive. I spot myself here and there. But it's with students, it's co-ed, it's a C level, and we have B level, and there's A level. So, and we have this new sports facility for students. We have the restored Gregory Gym. It was just fantastic. I had a visiting scholar from Belgium in late August who we would work 8-10 hours a day, and then we go over for a swim in the evening, and it was just delightful. In fact, I thank the intramural facilities are here for students to participate. There are club sports as well, like rowing and things of that sort, that are available to all students. So that's there, and it's highly supported at this university. Again, I am not going to argue that there are excesses. At the same time, I am convinced by some of the arguments that SAT scores are not the only predictors of the ability to have academic success. I've seen this in students of all color. People who by determination or because they come from school districts, whether just poor school districts. you come from a poor school district, you don't have a good education, you're going to do poorly on the SATs, and when you come here, things have to be, if you're lucky, you can get tutoring, you can get put into the right courses, and the success is remarkable. And it's not cheating, it's not tinkering with the system, it's just, again, acknowledging a social problem and addressing it. And I think it's addressed quite well here and quite successfully. And in fact, the athlete percentage of graduation, as Brian Davis can confirm now that he's here, 82% for the current football cohort, it will exceed the normal student body. And again, I cannot deny that there are not problems, but in the system, and nor am I going to brush them aside. There are serious problems, but there are efforts being made, and if people in this room go away from this debate between Lino and me by saying, hey, maybe I can make my voice felt, and maybe I can do something in this area to improve one aspect or another of this critical problem, that'll be a real plus and a real
Look, let this be the decider. What you just heard was pure fantasy, right? He's trying to live in some wishful world. Hey, SAT isn't that important. He knows plenty of people who do better than the SAT indicates. Do you know what the truth is? The truth is, invariably, the performance of the preferred students does less well than the SAT would indicate. And especially with football players, especially with athletes, and most especially football players, because obviously they're spending so incredible amounts of time in other than study. But this is the fact. Is the SAT reliable, or is it biased in some way? This is the baloney he's feeding you, this liberal line that lets him go, right? Well, if it's biased, then the people who get the racial preference would exceed in their performance what the SAT indicates. I put it to you, and I don't think it is controversial, I put it to you as a matter of fact, that the opposite is true. That these people do less well than their SAT, despite the wonderful persons he knows done better. Isn't that wonderful? Look, let me define the debate here. He wants to talk about socialism and elevators to rich people and so on, and Barbara Jordan likes sport.
Don't throw in Bob Dylan again.
It's all one big fog, miasma. It's not the issue. The issue is this a corrupt enterprise? Is big-time college football a commercial enterprise rather than educational? No one doubts that that's the case. And is it inconsistent in taking money from what could be academic at the vast majority of schools, although not at this incredibly commercially successful one, because generally it has even lower standards than most schools? That's the issue, right? You can't deny that. If you want to talk about the elevator to the boxes, that's another story. Talk to Palaima.
Well, Lino,
hear about the SAT score again.
I already corrected you on the statistics you cited from my Coyer report. So that does not give me great confidence that other kinds of statistics that you were... In fact, you don't cite any statistics. You just claim that those people don't measure up to their SAT scores.
I can cite endless works.
Yes, and I noticed that when you were talking about the topic of alumni giving and how much it would benefit from football, you cited one article. Now, I don't know about anybody who's an academic here or even a student will know that on any topic, even in the most ultra-specialized field, my Mycenaean paleography, which was my greatest claim to fame, I just finished a 95-page chapter of a book on the history of Mycenaean paleography, talking about it with Brian Davis the other day, and he fell asleep on me. But I can give you an article that will say anything about anything. A single article on something has no weight. An article that has been scrutinized has 3 more articles defining its parameter. Well, yes, but to cite one article from, I don't even know, you gave a year, but I don't know what that was supposed to demonstrate. But to cite one article doesn't prove a point at all.
Well, that's true. You have to begin somewhere. This article looked like it was very reputable. A Cornell professor of management in a major publication. And what he did, what the article was, is he purported to review lots of articles. And it seemed to me it was rather balanced. He said sometimes it does increase applications and so on. So all I said was that the facts don't support well the claim that it increases alumni giving. But again, this is a dodge. There are, of course, the question of the effect of SAT scores and how valid they are in predicting is one of the most studied and important questions you can imagine, right? There are endless books. The book on college football is by William Bowen that I have there, who was formerly the president of Princeton, and he and Bach, formerly the president of Harvard, wrote a big book called The Shape of the River, which Tom knows about, in which they defend affirmative action, but they don't contest that, they don't claim the SAT score does not accurately reflect, that it's in any way balanced, that it's in any way biased. In fact, it doesn't accurately reflect in that it overpredicts. And in the case of football, it overpredicts by a lot. So to say, I only cited one article. Look, see what I'm telling you is true or not. I can't lie about this to you. And if you want cites, I'll give you lots of books. And judge the truth and the validity of this discussion on what you find out. I'll settle for that. Go
Well,
ahead.
but I'll settle, as I
Professor
said,
Palaima?
for empirical information that I have gotten from our own football program here.
I'm sorry, we only have time for one quick question.
One more question. There was a person who came to the microphone. Yes, you were just there.
I was wondering if the football program is self-supporting here, because it
Is self-supporting?
self-supporting, as in like we bring in a ton of revenue like all the time, but do we actually give money to like football?
No. Well, here's
So
the
if-
deal.
So if we didn't give any money to football and we made football its own separate entity with the UT branding,
Let me answer that. I mean, there's no. I was on the faculty council budgetary advisory committee in the very year where the last vestige of money that was being transferred from the academic side of the mission to the athletic side of the mission was gotten rid of.
Right.
And so from that point onward, it was a status quo. That is, athletics supports itself. The only wrinkle to that, the only qualification, is that Michael Granoff, if you go and talk to him, the Ernst & Young professor of accounting at the business school, who has been head of the faculty council and has even been involved with, he's been on the men's athletics council, I believe. He says that the sports is not charged, essentially the rental space for the footprint in the university that their buildings occupy and so forth. So he thinks that the indirect cost charges that are paid, for example, by scientists who get grant money to run laboratories should somehow be adjusted so that football would even send, not just football, but sports would send more money. But that's a technical argument as to whether that should be done or not. But in point of fact, they are self-sustaining.
Right, and I realize it's only with a very small minority of the whole,
25 out of
5%,
120
5%.
Division 1A schools are in the black.
Right.
The others are an average of $10 million in the red. And that, I agree with Lino, is a serious, serious social problem, whether you take an elevator to the skybox or sit in the bleachers.
But the other aspect of that, Tom, to be totally fair, is that when we quit giving money from the university fund to athletics, at that same time, they took over the copyright for the entire university.
Mhm.
And so while we now get money back from that copyright, we actually don't earn as much from the copyright as we theoretically could be earning if that was still going into the academic fund.
Well, again, yeah, I know that argument, and all I can do is trust the people up top who have, because in point, no, seriously, please listen to me. I mean, don't be laughing, and this is not, Palaima using mental gymnastics. The copyright, a lot of things around here, given the fact that it was a big state institution, slow to change and so forth, were slow in developing, and UT was well behind the 8 ball in copyrights of all sorts. But in point of fact, it was the sports and athletics program that got their act together quickly and are generating still the most money off of copyright and so forth. So essentially the agreement reached by the powers that be up in the tower was that here, we'll give it over to you and then you guarantee us what I said, $1 million a year or 10% of the gross revenues. Now that it may be that the rest of the university is generating enough money from things that are trademark items and so forth that the thing should be re-looked at, the percentages should be adjusted. But I think it was a reasonable business decision at the time, but.
Well, with that last statement, I would like to conclude the debate. I would like to thank Professor Graglia and Professor Palaima for debating with us, and I would like to thank all of you guys for participating.
Well, thank you for holding it. And thank you, Lino. Thank you. This is the Bob Dylan stuff. Bob is great.
You don't regret lying about SAT scores?
Bob is great.